Hi everyone, it's Lisa here. I'm back today as a guest on the Foiled Fox blog, and I'm going to be sharing an interactive card with you, something a little bit different for me. I don't make them too often, but I do enjoy them when I do, and I hope that you'll enjoy seeing this come together. So for today's card, I'm going to be using the My Favourite Things Peek-A-Boo Wheel Die-namics. I'm going to take the main wheel and I'm going to die cut it twice, once from Neenah 110 cardstock and the second time from printer paper. The printer paper template is actually just going to be used as a guide for my stamping, and you could actually do this also with acetate so that you can reuse it if you want to, but for the purposes of today I'm just going to use some printer paper and show you how to use it with that. I've got both of my die cuts ready now. I'm just taking the printer paper die cut, folding that in half, and I'm going to snip off a section from either end. So it doesn't need to be too big. It's going to be the area where I stamp my directional arrow, and then I'm going to fold that back on itself and I'm going to snip off a bit at each end. So that will create 4 different areas for me to stamp my arrow into, and they're all going to be evenly spaced around the wheel. To secure both of the die cuts together whilst I do the stamping, I'm going to take a small brad and I'm just going to secure the printer paper template on top of the cardstock wheel. And you can see it moves around pretty easily. It's secure enough for me to do the stamping, but loose enough for me to be able to move it round. So I'm taking the directional arrow from the Lawn Fawn Reveal Wheel Sentiments set, and I'm just going to place that on my acrylic block. I'm going to take some Memento Tuxedo black ink and I'm going to stamp that down in each of the areas that were cut away from the paper template. So apologies for my head getting in the way, but I want to make sure that I get them as close to the edge of the wheel as possible. So you can see now how easily that moves around and how evenly spaced they are. I'm going to set that to one side now, and I'm going to move on to creating the background for the card. So I've taken the My Favourite Things Mini Cloud Edges stencil. I've got some Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock here, and I'm going to blend some Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide ink down the panel. I don't quite go all the way to the bottom as I am going to have some grass there, but I go about 3/4 of the way down and I rotate the stencil as I go. So you can move this stencil around, you can flip it over. As I say, it's got 4 different cloud patterns. It's really pretty, I think, with the smaller cloud edges, and I think you get a lovely effect when you create a background where all the edges are quite near to each other rather than more spaced out. You can see there the variety that you get just by flipping the stencil around and over. I did toy with doing a rainbow sky background, but in the end I just went with one colour. I really love the colour of peacock feathers and I felt that it would have more impact in one colour. I've got some My Favourite Things Limelight cardstock here, and I've taken 2 of the Die-namics from My Favourite Things Grassy Hills, and I'm just going to cut 2 banks out. Obviously the Die-namics coordinate well with each other, so I've just picked 2 and I've made 2 banks which are slightly different sizes, and I'm going to add a little bit of extra interest to them by blending some Mowed Lawn Oxide ink onto the edges. That will darken the edges a little bit and make them stand out a bit more against each other. And as I do with all of my ink blending, I do tap off the excess to one side before I bring the blending tool to the cardstock, just to make sure that I don't put too much on. And those are the 4 elements that I've created so far for the card. The focus of this video is really on the creation of the wheel and the assembly of the card. So I'm not going to show you the stamping and colouring of the images. I do stamp them with Memento Tuxedo black ink onto Neenah cardstock, that's £80. I coloured them with Copics and I die cut them with the coordinating dies. The colours that I've used are going to be listed over on the Foiled Fox blog. The link will be in the description below if you're interested in knowing what I used. For the next part of the card, I'm just temporarily adhering the grass to the bottom of the background panel, and I'm going to set my wheel onto the card. I'm now going to work out exactly where I want to die cut that area in the background panel, and that's going to be the area where I stamp my sentiment that will be revealed as you turn the wheel round. I've placed a few of my images down just to make sure I get the right placement for the die, and I'm just going to take a pencil and mark off where I want to die cut that window from the paper template. And now that I've got that paper template die cut, I can use that and position that on my background panel, adhere it with some low tack tape and then run that through, and I've now got my window in the exact right position on my background panel. And of course I realised afterwards that I should have removed my grass banks before running that through the die cutting machine, but fortunately they did come up okay. I'm going to take the edge die from the Die-namics set, and I'm now going to put that on the right hand side of my background panel. I'm going to use some low tack tape to adhere it, and then I'm going to run that through the die cutting machine. The die does leave a slightly embossed edge along the right hand side, but I'm going to use a Hero Arts rectangle infinity die anyway, just to trim that panel down, so that actually gets taken out once I die cut that down to size, because that's going to be matted onto some pink cardstock. Moving back to the wheel and the sentiment part of the card now, I'm just taking a craft pick and I'm pushing the hole through the background panel, and I'm going to attach the wheel behind with a brad, and you can see how easily that moves around. It's now time for us to work on the reveal sentiment part of the card. I've removed the wheel from the back of the background panel and I've put our paper template back on top and I've adhered it with a brad, and I'm now going to use that as my guide to stamp the sentiment. I've actually cut my sentiment into 4 because I've got 4 window areas. I've cut it with scissors and I'm mounting it up onto an acrylic block. I'm stamping with Memento Tuxedo black ink, and I've stamped my first word, and then I rotate the template 90 degrees clockwise, set it back down again, and I stamp the second part of the sentiment. And you carry on doing this until you've stamped all the 4 different parts of the sentiment, stamping it down, rotating it 90 degrees. I make sure it's lined up properly with the directional arrows, and then I stamp the final bit down. It really isn't that complicated. It looks more complicated, I think, when you see it first time, but once you've done it a couple of times, it really isn't that tricky to do. You just want to make sure that you reveal your words in the right order. And of course you can check it as you go just to make sure that it's revealing correctly. And finally, as I had a little bit of a gap after you, I took the heart from Lawn Fawn Home for the Holidays and I've stamped that down using some Versacolour Camellia ink, and now that sort of completes that area of the sentiment. That finishes the sentiment wheel part of the card. So I've removed the paper template. I'm now going to attach that back onto the background panel, just using a very small brad and securing it behind. We're going to move on now to the final part of the card. I've added some foam tape onto the back of the background panel. I'm going to be adhering that down onto an A2 top folding base card. Now you do want to make sure you use foam tape here. You need that background panel to be popped up on top of your base card in order for the wheel to move freely. For the bottom part of the grassy hills, I've used some double-sided tape and I'm just going to adhere that flat onto the background panel. I have trimmed that down to size. The second part of the grassy hills bank is actually going to be popped up with foam tape, just to give a little bit of extra dimension. And now I'm going to work on the final placement of my images. I have added some foam tape onto the back of some of them. Some of them will be adhered flat to the card with some Ranger multimedia mat, but I have varied it. You do want to make sure you cover that brad in the centre, so I have put some foam tape on the back of the trees and I've just popped that over the top. This is definitely a card where you need to do a little bit of planning. As you can see, it was made a lot easier by me having my images ready. I did stamp and colour pretty much everything from the set, and so when I was doing my draft of this card, I was able to kind of push things and move things around and see how I wanted them to be. But it's one of those cards where you do have to think ahead a little bit, because you want to make sure that you get your images all in the right place and that you can see that sentiment reveal clearly. And even though I've got a cloudy background, I thought it would be fun to include the puffy clouds from the set as well, just to give a little bit of variation in the sky. As you can see there, I had put that image down flat and then I decided I wanted to pop it up, so I've just removed it, added some foam tape onto the back, and I'm just going to stick that one back down. And that finishes the card. They do take a while to do, but I think they're so much fun to create and they're definitely a lot of fun to receive. So worth the time and effort of making them, and I hope you think so too. Right at the last minute, I thought I'd add in a little bit of sparkle onto the kite, the ice cream cart, ice cream and skipping rope. So I just added some Tonic Nouveau Aqua Shimmer onto those parts of the images. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do hope that you enjoyed the card. All supplies that I've used will be listed in the description below, over at the Foiled Fox blog and also on my blog, and I'll put the links in the description below. If you enjoyed the video, please don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up and to hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more from me.